Well, let's talk about the great news that the UK travel list, red list, is cut to just 7 countries. How did you decide to cut it down to just 7 from the large number that were on it previously, and why now?
Yeah, reduced by 47 countries. Mainly, actually, because we had this superb vaccination program in the UK. Essentially, other parts of the world have caught up. That's been a really important factor in this. And the other thing is actually a bit technical, but the Delta variant, that's the one that's prevalent here, has become prevalent around the world. And what it's tended to do is push out other variants of concern. So where Delta is in existence, it does have the impact of taking other variants of concern and sort of crushing them. Those two factors together have meant that we're now able to release all of those countries. We're down to only 7 countries on the red list. Means that people can travel again, enjoy their freedoms again, go on holiday again, see family again, do business again, and most of all, sort of help the travel industry itself and all the thousands of jobs involved in it get back up
Well,
on their feet or in
the
the air.
the reality is actually most other countries didn't have so many countries on the red list. We were something of an anomaly on this front, in which case a lot of this was, many people believe, just theatre for a lot of time. That, having limits on travel is very popular according to the opinion polls and the focus groups, and that it hasn't really served any particular purpose.
Well, I'm happy to put on record that I would have loved to have had no countries
I,
at
I
all
do know
and
that.
no
I do know
restrictions. I'm
that.
the Transport Secretary, right? But the reality is the government has to weigh up the various different risks. I think it's true to say that as a more vaccinated, in fact, the most vaccinated sort of developed country, we then were in a position of not wanting anything to go wrong, perhaps by re-importing, and possibly we're more conscious of that as an issue because it's always the relative position of your own country and other countries compared with you. The big difference now is that other countries have got on with their vaccination program. It's worth pointing out that these quite radical changes today, removing 47 countries from the red list, removing PCRs and switching to a
Ah,
simple lateral
yes.
flow, it's only for people who are fully vaccinated.
Yeah,
So,
we are in
yeah,
a
so,
two tier
yeah.
society, aren't we? Let's talk about the PCR jabs though, because it's very expensive to go on holiday. We've basically said you can go on holiday if you're well enough well enough off to go on holiday, and to hell with everybody else by imposing this huge hundreds and hundreds of pounds extra cost of getting a test, often for the kids to get to another country, and then you've got the lateral flow before you come back, and then the PCR afterwards, and it's made it just out of reach for many families to do, quite apart from the confusion and about what you do need to get. Why are we getting rid of PCR tests now? Why could we not have got rid of them in August when millions of other families would have liked to be able to go away on holiday but simply couldn't afford those tests? Why now?
Yeah.
Most of those tests were not used to actually track any of the variants. There was genomically tracked. They cost an absolute fortune. They cost 2 or 3 times what they cost on the continent. Why are you getting rid of them now? Why
Yeah,
couldn't you have got rid of them earlier, or cut the cost for them earlier and allowed people to go on holiday?
I think it's fair to say that given that we only did the full unlock, if you recall, on the 19th of July, and we had to delay that by 3 weeks to ensure that sufficient numbers of people had got their vaccinations after the Delta variant, which was much more transmissible, got going. Because of that, in August, the month later, there was not sufficient comfort to say scrap the pre-departure test that you had to do before you returned, or scrap the PCR tests that you had to do when you got back here. Though we did scrap the day 8 test for people who were double vaccinated, so we had stepped down a bit already. But I think it was a question of no one could quite see the future, and people wanted to know, certainly the scientists wanted to know that the whole thing was working. What we've now seen through September and into the beginning of October is that did all work, and actually we've already scrapped the pre-departure test that went a little while ago. So you don't, well, before you leave a country, you no longer have to take a test to come to the United Kingdom. And this change actually means that people will switch as well to not having to do a PCR, to do a simple lateral flow test.
And have you come to an agreement in the cabinet about whether or not these is? We know Sajid Javid, the health secretary, wants people to be videoed while they do them, because you know as well as I do, if someone's got a PCR test at home, they can just click on negative. They don't need to even do the test. So how are you going to verify people are doing those tests?
Yeah, so we're not going to have videos because I think it would have become very cumbersome, expensive, bandwidth issues to upload them, and you can imagine the rest of it, I think we would have ended up where we were with PCR tests in terms of costs. Instead, we're going to ask people to do a lateral flow test. We'll ask them simply to book it in advance so they can put it on their PCR form, and then they're likely to ask people to do a picture of the cassette showing the negative result. Or actually, for many people, as they come through the airport, they may choose, because a day 2 test is actually up to day 2. Yeah. The people may come through the airport and actually just choose.
But why do they have to, if these are so vital, why do people have to pay for them? Why is my daughter handed, just boxes and boxes of these lateral flow tests? I can get them from the office for free. I can send off to the NHS for them free. But if I'm travelling, which apparently is so dangerous and so awful and such a risk to the country, I have to pay it's 40, 50 quid for a lateral flow now?
You're a low tax, fiscally conservative person. It has to be paid for somewhere. There's not really free, is it? And I suppose you could say that travel, by and large, is a more discretionary activity. There'll be exceptions to that, but by and large, if someone is choosing to do something, then it's not unreasonable to ask them to pay some of the costs. I should say, though, that the system will be, and my colleagues from the Department of Health and the Home Office, because this includes the border force changing the passenger locator form, will be announcing more details on this soon. Okay. But the system will be that if your test is positive, you take the lateral flow and it's positive, you are then automatically sent an NHS PCR test. You're in the NHS system, so you're in a way you'll get your way from that regard.
But nevertheless, this is profiteering. I don't mind paying for the cost of these tests, but I'm paying for people to make millions in profits and million. I mean, I can afford it. Well, lucky old me, but millions of families can't, and millions of families who've not been sitting at home drinking their lattes or on their laptops for the last year, saying, isn't lockdown fun? They've actually been out working, and they deserve to have their holidays, and they couldn't afford to have them. And I think a lot of people feel very resentful about that. Let's move on, though, talk about other issues. There's a warning of 60,000 deaths from flu. Worst case scenario, it's modelling. Not sure how much we trust modelling and worst case scenarios anymore, but there is a big concern among medical practitioners that we could be seeing high deaths from flu this winter. We're normally around the 11,000 a year number for flu. How concerned are you about that? And will we once again be facing calls if we see the NHS being overwhelmed with COVID, flu and all these routine operations that have been left for the last 18 months? Will we be facing calls for us to lock down to protect the NHS once again?
Well, I think actually, as with all of these projections, as you rightly identify, it then depends how people respond to them. So if people come forward and take one of the 40 million flu jabs, which are going to be offered to specific groups, anyone over 50, young people who are vulnerable, and so on and so forth. If people do that, then of course that will help to protect not just them, but society from flu. And it's important, therefore, that people do heed the warnings and come forward, and then hopefully we will do very much better than that, and not only save lives, but also protect the NHS as well. So I think, it's a circular thing, isn't it? You can improve the situation by coming forward. I don't know. I mean, I think in the past, before going through coronavirus, a lot of people will have received the sort of, come forward for your flu jab, and sort of thought, well, I'm usually all right with these things. It's not about you. It's about the other people that your jab will protect. So I think we can all help. I'll certainly be coming forward the moment I'm asked to take a flu jab this year. And my attitude's a bit different, actually, after coronavirus, I have to say.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to plan to take one this year, which I would not normally do. And again, that's very, very different from being asked to go for a jab and being told to sort of lock down, restrict who you see, and not go to work or closing bars or closing schools or whatever it is. The next plan is going to be, we know we've got plan A, there's plan B, there's also plan C for the government. We're constantly talking about this need to protect the NHS, even though it was put in place to protect us. If the NHS feels it's unable to cope, which they apparently don't feel they can cope every single winter, despite all this extra money going in, we know there's a staff shortage, we know there's going to be pressures in December and January. Will it be justified if we've got a load of flu deaths that we lock down again or have restrictions again? Or will we make sure that the NHS has built up enough extra capacity and got the extra staff in that they can cope without the rest of us having to limit our lives once again?
Well, look, I very much hope we don't end up in that kind of situation, either through COVID or through flu. I don't think we've ever ended up there from flu.
Has the Cabinet discussed this?
Well, as you mentioned, we had plan A and we have a plan B if required. I have to say, since we were discussing that, which is probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now, the numbers have continued to be encouraging. We haven't seen a big explosion in the level of coronavirus. Where we have seen coronavirus, it's been largely within an age group which is much less vaccinated, the secondary school age group, for example, who, of course, don't get seriously ill by and large through coronavirus, and many of whom are actually getting their first jabs in any case now. So a really, really important fact that I'm just going to mention is that all the deaths from coronavirus this year in hospital, 99% are people who are not fully vaccinated. So the message could not be simple enough. You can protect your lives, the lives of your loved ones, and the pressure on the NHS by having people ensure they get vaccinated. And now that's doubly true because of the vaccination for flu as well. But no, I don't foresee us going there. And certainly the figures so far, I think, have been reassuring.
Well, remarkably different from the models.
People said don't unlock. People said, I remember Keir Starmer saying don't unlock. We'd all be in lockdown if he'd had his way. We unlocked. Life has returned to normal. Today we're saying people are able to travel a lot more freely than we've been able to do for a year and a half. And I've got every confidence that as long as we carry on being sensible with booster jabs and all the rest of it, then life will be able to continue, and that's what we hope to see.
I certainly hope so as well. I really want to get into very, very quick questions. Soaring energy prices, £2,000 a year energy bill possibly for families next year. It's a very big concern. What is the government going to do about it, other than the obvious, which is to abandon net zero 2050? Which is what's got us into the predicament in the first place.
No, I don't agree, but that's the problem. The problem is global gas prices caused by coronavirus, meaning that as countries came out of the lockdowns, there's been a huge increase in economic activity. None more so, by the way, than the UK, going gangbusters. The economy's growing the fastest of the largest economies, the G7 group of economies. What are we doing about it? Number one, we don't buy our gas from Russia. I think it's only about 3% of our gas. We have domestic gas supply. We have gas supply from Norway. Number two, we actually have over half, I think, of our entire energy supply from renewables and nuclear. So we're relying less and less on things like gas and oil and coal, very little now, which is all very, very good and hopeful. And contrary to your suggestion, I think it's actually the opposite. I think the more we can move away from that old-fashioned situation where we're relying on gas and the global price affected by the supply from Russia and all the rest of it, and the better off we'll be.
Well, we could have been fracking nice clean shale gas, and we could have been building more nuclear power stations, but we haven't been because of net zero. We're relying on wind that when it doesn't blow, we get into a crisis. There's lots to talk about. I'm going to ask you finally though, what do you make of the decision by the Premier League to allow Newcastle United to be taken over by a Saudi consortium?
Well, I saw the news break yesterday. Obviously, it's a matter for Newcastle United and the Premier League. They must pass a test, the owners and directors test, which they will have looked at. They legally must pass that test. I think they will have looked at that and seen that this is not the state of Saudi Arabia. It's been set up as an entirely separate entity. For those still concerned, though, Tracy Crouch, who's MP, former sports minister, I think actually an FA qualified coach as well. She is carrying out a football review that's looking into the finances of football, Premier League and the rest of it, the ownership structures. And I know that she'll be looking at what's happened at Newcastle United to look at any lessons as well. I did note a lot of the fans were rather pleased to see the club move on the TV screens last night as well.
All right, Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary, thank you very much indeed.